All right. Well, week 3. I like the rotation in this class because of everybody who does teach and volunteer in kids ministry. So you can see like who's out somewhere else and who's back in for the week. So with that in mind, to kind of recap where we've been, um, week 1 we spent a little time thinking about our objectives and the long-term trajectory, our long-term goal as parents. Like, okay, when these years of 18 to 20 or 30, depending on how it goes, of your kids in your house go, like where do we want to be when they're done? When they leave our home, what are the basic things we want to make sure we communicate clearly, that they see, and that we drive them towards? And also in that first week, we covered a key piece that we'll hit on, I hope, every week as we go through, is the value and the necessity of us evaluating ourselves to see, hey, where are we both spiritually and what we are reflecting to our kids in our life, and also as we discipline and we correct them and as we disciple them, are we doing it well? Or are there areas that we are getting lazy or that we are getting lax that we need to work on? Are there things that we're modeling that are, we're driving hard in our kids' lives, but we're not practicing in our own? And are they seeing that? Are they picking that up? Week 2 was really a talk about how some of that plays out in the day to day, and also the biblical authority that plays the foundational role in our parenting. That we have authority in our homes and with our kids because it's an authority bestowed on us, but it's not for us to abuse to our own ends. It's pointing our kids to Christ and showing them biblical authority. And then talking about just spiritual disciplines, how we foster spiritual disciplines in our kids, how we do that in the home, and encourage and drive towards that. So this week, our focus is going to turn towards an obedient heart. So I talk about where we want to be in our trajectory, how we foster an obedient heart in our kids, and that playing an integral part in the what and the why of how we parent. So last week I shared what the definition of obedience is in our home, like what it is that when we tell our kids, like when we expect you to obey something, what does that mean? We said obey without challenge, obey without excuse, and obey without delay. And to add to that piece this week is the definition and the understanding that that is the obedience, and there's an outside action that goes with that. But also, we parent not just for the right actions, we parent for the right motives. And we're looking and evaluating not just what happens, but why it happened. And the knowledge that, hey, we can focus on having really obedient kids, and we can see a lot of people that have really obedient kids, but that without the right motives, that's not the result, that's not that long-term objective of a disciple of Christ, of a loving and serving heart that we're hoping to foster. We're looking for joyful obedience, not obedience just out of fear or grumbling. And in that we're driving them towards character. And obviously, like conceptually it sounds like a lot, but we all know it plays out pretty simple, right? And I could use myself as an example of, say, if in the home I chose to demonstrate authority and drive my kids towards obedient actions by just fear and domineering. Like, I could do that, right? Like, they would know that, okay, if dad tells me to do something and I don't do it, he's going to shout and scream and force me to do it. Like, that could be, and I could get good behavior out of that, right? Like, and we've seen it. Probably had friends who've lived in a home like that. Like, okay, if dad's here, you've got to walk the fine line. And what do you see with that? You see good behavior when dad's around, and then what eventually gets learned? Well, I'm obedient because I'm afraid of my dad and his reaction. So when he's around, I'm well behaved. But then what happens? When he's not around, the lesson learned is, well, when dad's not around, or I can do something that he doesn't find out about, then hey, the rules don't apply anymore. And so we focus on the actions and the motives behind them. And especially with the little ones, we understand that right actions come before the right motives. And we all know that well, and we probably practice it in ways we don't think about. When you teach a kid to say, I'm sorry, or you teach a kid to apologize. Like as little as one, we might teach our kids, okay, you need to say sorry if you do that. And we teach them to say sorry before they even know what being sorry means. And as they grow and as they get older, we have to add the motive and have the conversation of why I'm saying I'm sorry matters. And, we, we had it a couple times in our home this week. It's like, okay, you can't go, yep, I'm sorry I punched you. Like, no, that's not probably showing that you're really sorry if you're saying it with that attitude. But saying sorry means more than that. You have to really understand what you did, how it impacted that other person, and not be looking to do it again. So, obedience in the early years is valuable for a couple reasons. One, it's teaching and modeling them to obey their Heavenly Father, to submit to His will. Two, it just flat out like helps us live in community with them, right? There are some benefits for the entire home and peace in having children that are obedient and do submit to the parental authority. And three, and this one kind of blows me away, moral development is said to begin around 1 and be set by 10 to 11. So a realization that like these early years are vitally important to hit at the motive piece for them developing that and understanding it into the teenage years, right? Like understanding right and wrong and the basis for authority and the basis for the right and wrong early on. And this is hard, right? Like it is really hard to address the motives. It's easy with actions, and I think a lot about like what our defaults are. And especially on a day like Father's Day, it's easy to think about, okay, it's self-care, like take a day to relax. And I think we could emphasize that. And I think I would choose today to emphasize the other end of it and say, like, work hard. Like as dads and as moms, like work hard at these things and think about what your default setting is, your default personality, and then what you need to drive for on the other end, because we're all a little different. Some of us, the default setting when we deal with our children is passiveness or all forgiveness. And so we're extra permissive and we're like, okay, he just having a bad day. She's just going through a difficult time. We're going to let that slide today. Others of us drive the other way, are ultra authoritative, and we react heavily to the things that annoy us the most, right? Like we'll come out strongly against things that are an annoyance to us personally instead of looking at the things that maybe the motives that we need to be concerned with. I'm curious. Well, we've got I wish Scott were in here for this question, but how many of you are like to mow the grass? Anybody? One. Heather does. Yes.
When I had a yard, I like.
If Scott ever let me, I think I would enjoy it, but he loves it way too much.
See,
He like it would be like stealing his. Yeah.
I know Heather does, but I'm not one of those people. Like I don't enjoy it. Like there's those sayings you probably have in your home that your kids, you hope they remember. Like one of mine that I say all the time is like, I cannot imagine a scenario where on my deathbed I look back on my life and say, I wish I'd mowed the grass more. Like it's just not, it's not a thing for me. Like but I recognize that like, hey, the longer I don't do it, like the worse it is when I do, right? Like it happens every week. The grass never stops growing, and it comes up, and it's an annoying task, and I got to do it all the time and never stop. But what happens if you don't? Like what happens if you just leave it? It grows up. It takes bigger equipment. What happens if you leave it for like the entire summer?
You'll have animals. Critters.
You get critters. You leave it for years, and then you have shrubs and trees. And we have enough people in the lawn care business or in this church that, like if you ask them, like, what is the worst thing you get a call for? And they're like, the worst thing is in the fall, somebody calls and said, my mower broke in the spring, and I haven't been able to mow my grass. Can you come do it for the end of the year? And it's this high, and it's an enormous amount of work. And look, it's not a perfect analogy, but I think a lot of that about our parenting. Like, and especially when you look at that end result of like the teenage years. If you neglect everything for 4 or 5 years, you got trees and you got shrubs in the yard that now take a chainsaw and an excavator to deal with things. And so I would encourage us all, like, we've got to do the harder thing now when they're young, when their moral development is happening, so that when we get to teenage years, when we get older, we're not having excavator level work to do. And that's a challenge, right? And it's hard, and it takes effort, and it takes intentionality. And we circle back to parenting overall with the long term in mind, thinking about the trajectory of where we want to go, and thinking about the big picture long term, what we want to develop. Because the struggle for us is when we focus on the short term, we tend to make decisions based on immediate payoff. And again, it's a fancy concept, it's really simple, right? Like, you come home, you're exhausted from work, and the kids are crazy, and you're trying to make dinner, and you're like, all right, I'm just turning the TV on. Y'all just watch the TV for the night and veg out so that I don't have to mess with it. I don't have to deal with it. Or you got people coming over, you're in a hurry, and they need to clean their rooms, and you know every time you ask them to clean their room, it's a fight. So you say, well, I'm just going to do it for them. Like, forget it. It's not even going to ask. Like, I'm going to do it. Like, when we focus on the short term and the now, we tend to make the decisions that come with the immediate payoff. Let's open up our Bibles for a second. Talk about why we parent and focus on the heart. Mark chapter 7. Somebody mind reading for us Mark 7, 21 and 22? That's all right. Let's just ask the context of chapter 7. Like, what's going on in Mark 7? How did we get to 21 and 22? And I love this analogy for a lot of reasons. I love thinking about this section of scripture in context of parenting for a lot of reasons, because it's kind of funny when you say that out loud. Like, Jesus is addressing with them that they're mad about the disciples not washing their hands. What's the overall point that Jesus is pointing to with the Pharisees? That's not what makes you dirty. Like, and even more than that, like, you're missing the whole point. Like, you're missing the whole point of the law of the scriptures, in that you are focusing on the rules and you're missing the fact that the heart is what matters. And so, yeah, when we talk about parenting, I mean, that's it, right? Like, it's the same conversation that Jesus had with the disciples over the Pharisees. It's the same thing he called them out for. Like, as parents with our kids, we're not focusing on that action. We're focusing on what's the motive behind it. What is the heart? What is the heart reason that is causing this behavior challenge? And asking questions to get there. Like, there's the diagnostic phase for us. Like, to think, okay, if I see this action that needs correction, like, what is their motive behind it, and how do I diagnose what that is? A lot of times it's easy, right? Especially with their little, like, mine. You know, you're like, there's this selfish heart behind here that we need to talk about, that we need to evaluate ways to have the discussion on putting others above their self. And as they get older, it might find it a little more challenging, but we're looking for the sour attitudes to talk over. Like, okay, I see that you're being obedient, you're doing what I ask, but I see that the attitude that you're doing it with is problematic. And so we look for little ways to have those conversations. I know for us, one of the ways that we've tried it frequently is with, like, general manners. This is an easy one, and it's funny because I think culturally a lot of manners are falling by the wayside. And I would ask if maybe they're falling by the wayside because the motive is forgotten. Right? Like, manners for manners' sake are not very helpful, right? Like, it not. But, when you go out to the store or when you watch, the Black Friday shopping deals and you see it on full display, like simple things like waiting in line or opening doors for people, we all have experienced the rude behavior, and it demonstrates that the person who is charging ahead has their own interests above all else, right? But for our kids, and we can think about having those conversations when we foster manners. Talked with our boys a lot lately. We've been focusing on like trying to remember to open the doors and hold the door open for somebody else. And the point of that isn't just to do it to be nice, but to talk through with them. Hey, like you're opening the door, and it's a demonstration that you love and care about others. It's a demonstration that you're thinking of others' interests above your own, and you're doing it as a service to them. You consider them more important than yourself. You speak calmly and politely to adults because you love and you value what they're saying, and you listen to other people. The one in we had a even more frequent conversation about this week was interrupting. Like, you don't interrupt me when I speak, as because you love and respect me and show me you want to hear what I say. And that goes for other people around you when adults are having conversations. Like for you barging in, convenience for us plays out, but the hard issue is you're demonstrating respect and love for others, that you care about what they say. And again, it's hard and it's a challenge, and our gut often is to parent towards the things that cause us the most disruption or are embarrassing or that make us look bad to others. And it's Father's Day, but I couldn't help but think back towards a Mother's Day scenario we had play out. We always go, one of our Mother's Day traditions for Heather is we go pick up flowers at Lowe's. And it's her springtime flowers for the house. So we go to do that this trip, and we take all 3 kids. And it's always busy. There's always a lot going on. As we get out of the car, kid number 1 has a toy that he wants to take with him. And I said, we're not taking it with you. You leave it in the car. And complied immediately. Left it in the car, but went silent. All right? So put him in the cart. We're driving along in the cart, and we get to the flower section. We're doing our thing. The kid number 1 is happy. He's excited. He's thinking about mom for the day. And somebody else is coming down towards us with their cart, and he realizes our cart's in the way. So he recognizes an issue over there, starts to move our cart excitedly, hurries, slams into a display, knocks over flowers, nearly topples our cart, and winds up bleeding in the process. Try not to cry. Meanwhile, kid number 2's been sitting in the cart, no sound, completely silent, not talking, for 30 minutes now. Like, what do you address? Which one do you want to address most harshly? Because, that's embarrassing. And this had me reflecting a lot on it as I was prepping for the class, because one is getting our judgmental looks. Like the kid in the cart, by everybody else's standards around us, is the well-behaved child. But he's the one with the bad heart issue, right? Like he is the one who is sullen and angry and did the right action but had poor motives and needs more discussion with. Kid number 1 has embarrassed us, has broken things, and certainly, for him, it's a discussion for us to have of like, hey, buddy, your motives were right. Like, you were trying to do the right thing. I'm proud of you for seeing that our stuff needed to be moved and trying to do it, but your self-control got the better of you and caused issues. But it's in those pressure-filled circumstances that it's tough for us to think about how do we hit on not just what we see and what others see, and we got a lot of judgmental eyes of people going, that kid's out of control. You could see it on their faces, right? But acknowledging that, hey, there was a good motive in there, and the one we really needed to address was the one by others' appearances that was being well behaved. And It plays out, okay, in how we address every little squabble, right? Like, what do you do? Two kids are fighting over a toy. What, and I don't know. I mean, throw it out there. What are your gut reactions? You see two of them fighting intensely over one toy. I mean, you get the standard options like, well, who had it first? Who had it first? And you're like, well, that's one way to go, but also acknowledging like, hey, if you always say like who had it first or who had rights to it, you're kind of validating the assertion of individual priority. Like it's mine. I had it first. I have rights to it. And so then what happens? Then every time you get in the fight, then the kid says, well, I had it first. So there's the establishment of rights. And so it might cause us to think about and diagnose those situations a little more. Like, how are we going to say, okay, the root of this challenge in both of you right now is that you're both demonstrating selfishness. Like you are both thinking of yourself first and your priority first. And it offers a chance for us to have the deeper diagnosis with them and talk them through the hard issue at hand. On occasion in our house, what we've done in situations that are more extreme is talk through like, hey, we value our family above our things. And as an example of that, if our things become more important to us than our family, we will do without said thing for short-term or longer-term times. And obviously, again, that's hitting on some actions and eliminating some things, but also I think the value in it is the communication behind it, not just, fine, if you're both fighting over it, I'm taking it and throwing it away. Like, okay, that's different than can we have the conversation? And don't get me wrong, I've not responded to that well on numerous occasions. I don't have to explain that to this group, but to find ways and to rethink how we respond to those scenarios and use them as teaching and communication opportunities. When we set the standards for obedience in our home and we think about the environment that we set up in our house, it dictates a lot whether our home is a child-centered home or an other-centered home. Like, is the focus on the kid, what makes them happy, what they want, or are we teaching them to look out for the interests of others? And there's this little piece of it that acknowledges like all of our kids, as are we, are shaped by our experiences and how we interact with those experiences. And, you think about, use a fictitious example of, woman who grew up as an only child. Maybe her parents were outstanding, she was never spoiled, but the house revolved around her and what she wanted. And it grows up in adulthood, there's a struggle when she's married and has a family and the whole world doesn't revolve around her anymore. I'm sure that teachers at school know this better than any of us. The fact that whatever's modeled in the home plays out in the kid's life. I heard a teacher use an example once of saying, had a kindergartner named Tommy. Tommy was a struggle in the class, and he would get mad when he didn't get his way, and he would take off running and leave the classroom, and we'd have to chase him down. And then, wondered about this behavior and had a parent-teacher conference. And I explained this to Tommy's dad. Tommy's dad got mad and left the meeting, and all of a sudden it made sense. Like, what we model in the home often plays out in our kids' lives, but at the same time, the piece I think we all acknowledge verbally, but sometimes we don't let it play out in our lives, is that we also don't shape our kids deterministically, right? Like, obviously they can choose as they grow up whether to accept or reject their molding. Like, we can teach them the value of Scripture in our home, and we can teach them right from wrong, but ultimately it's in their heart which path they're going to choose. And I think we, as believers especially, we got to be careful with this. I mean, we sometimes play out in our lives like if we basically shelter our kids to Jesus. Like, hey, I'm going to keep them with only the right friend group. I'll keep them mostly home. Maybe even like I'm just going to do Christian school or I'm just going to do homeschool. This idea that we could just completely take out all bad influences and determine trajectory. And again, not saying any of those things are bad things, just an acknowledgement that, like, at the end of the day, we have to pray intensely for our kids and think about what we teach them, and being able to teach them and show them and model in our family what family looks like, what family conflict looks like. Overall, like, what living as a believer in a broken world looks like, giving them an opportunity to see that in the day-to-day. I remember one of the more cutting, we'll say, criticisms of my parenting came from a family member who'd been staying at our house, and this was years ago. And I remember specifically a couple things about this. And the first thing is that I remember them talking about how well behaved our kids were, number one. And then after that, they made the comment and pretty blatantly said, like, you are way too strict and your kids are going to rebel when they get older. Like, my mom was like you are to me when I was a kid, and I rebelled, and that's what your kids are going to do. And a couple things struck me about that, and I tried to take it and at least reflect on it before I responded and see, maybe, is this accurate, is it not? There were two things. One, the irony of the fact that in their eyes, the fact that our kids were well behaved was like some luck of the draw thing. Like, they just got that, you just got lucky, man. You guys are so lucky that your kids are well behaved. And like, there's no connection between that and how we parent. And two, the harder thing was, the response to that is like, they may. Like, will be completely within their power at some point in their lives to completely rebel and reject the molding. But all I could tell you is that I pray every day for their hearts, that their hearts turn to follow Christ, that they are not hardened and they do not turn away from him. And I hope that they see in my life the understanding that God has high expectations for his people. And there's also an acknowledgement that we fall short of those expectations. And I know that my kids will, just as I will, but I hope that they know and they see the love and the joy and the mercy and the faithfulness that comes with a life of following Christ. And I hope that it's modeled well in our home so they see the joy of the relationship with Christ, just as they see a joy in their relationship with me, that they understand when they're disciplined and when I have high expectations for them, what it's rooted in, and that the relationship is valuable there. With that, let's kind of cut away for a second. We've talked about this value of focusing on the heart, and to enter into more of a discussion time, because I'd like to chat on a couple things. As we talk about focusing on the heart, also talking about building character. So just a little group sharing session to kind of see a lot of things weigh on my mind with our kids and how we develop character and foster a heart of servitude in them. And in a lot of ways, man, I think it's challenging in the culture we live, but more importantly, because of our wealth in a lot of ways. So I'll ask this first, like, as we seek to build a heart of gratitude in our kids, it's crazy to think about. We pretty much have the ability to give our kids anything that they could want. Like, obviously, as they get into adulthood and they grow up, their wants get more expensive. But as a kid, most of us financially can get them everything. Like any toy that they want, any amount of food or snack that they want, any treat that they want, we have the capacity, should we so desire, to do that to them. And in that, it makes it really hard to teach gratitude. Like, you see it. I know we see it in our kids. Like, if they go to grandma's house for a week and then they come home with us and we do special things, then all of a sudden, nothing's special. Everything's an expectation. So I'm curious for you all. I'll give you some of our ideas, but what do you do with your kids? What are ways that you think we can foster gratitude in them? Some work? Yeah. Anybody have tasks for their kids? Any of your kids have regular chores? What do you do? That's a great, like, I like that classification of like, okay, there are chores that I don't care if they don't get done, so maybe that's the bonus. Then there's the clear expectation of this is. But yeah, I think work is a key piece, like teaching the value of work. What else? How else do you intentionally work on gratitude in your house? Yeah, I love that. And I was going to go kind of along like the next question I had was contentment. Like the same thing, like how do you know, teaching gratitude and contentment with what you have. And I mean, the conversation piece is huge. And I remember one time, I can't remember which kid said it. I remember them asking me like, "Well, do you not have enough money? Like, can we get ice cream? Do you not have enough money to get ice cream?" You know, and walking through like, because what I'd learned in that was that a lot of times I'd said like, I'd talked about the financial aspect of it and said, "No, we want to save our money. We don't need to buy that." So then their hinge point on that was money. Like, well, if you got enough money, we should get it. But talking through and having the conversation, like you said, of okay, just because we can afford something and we can have it doesn't mean we get everything. And I think there's a lot of value in broadening perspective, and looking for ways to broaden our kids' perspective of what others have compared to what we have in many cases, and thinking, all right, what serve Frankfort, I think is a great opportunity, and we've done that with our kids, and again, the realization of having intentional conversations on the way to do it and why we're doing it, like, hey, we're going to serve others, and naturally in focusing on others first above yourself, I think the gratitude piece comes with that. Like you start to develop gratitude by seeing what all you have and what have you been blessed with. But more than that, like teaching gratitude for our family, like thankful that that we have the family members that we do, and thankful for the other people around us. But it's a struggle, and I'd say the more money you have, the bigger the struggle it is, right? I mean, we all have the friends who are super wealthy that have struggled with that. That just, if you don't have the world view, it's really hard to grasp and be thankful. Um, let's switch to talk about contentment more. So, we have a lot of discussion about contentment, and it cycles through like not just toys, but like food comes up a lot. Like, I want a snack. Like, why can't I have that snack? Why can't I have the candy? Why can't I go get this toy or go get this new thing at the store? So, what do you all do in the contentment department? Hannah, you had a good example. How do you foster contentment in your kids with what they have? Yeah, I think that's a great example, and I think back to Adrian, what you said about what we model in the home. Like that's been convictional for me of like the kids over like Parker especially is at this phase now where he wants to be in on like every conversation we have. Like he wants to overhear everything. He wants to listen in. And so he does a lot, and we're pulling him in on some now because we want him to hear like how we work on issues. Want him to know a little bit about money and how life works with money in our house. And but when we talk about like what we want, like does he hear us talking constantly, an evaluation of like when we were moving, like we're talking about a house, we're talking about, do we want a bigger house, do we want this or that, and are we, it was an evaluation point for us, are we showing our kids that we are not content where we are, or are we explaining to them some of our reasoning, or do we need to work on our contentment? Or we talk about, oh, we got to buy a new vehicle, and they hear us and they see us looking around or talking about it, and just in every little thing sometimes that we think about, look, my hobby is having hobbies. Like those of you that know me well know this. Like, so, for me, if I'm going to talk about something a lot, I got to be careful about, am I showing discontentment in my own life? Am I using toys, hobbies, and interests to distract myself from things? Because the kids pick up on it and see it. And if they're always hearing me talk about the new thing I want, they're going to talk about the new thing that they want. But again, I go back to, and I'm excited as we get out of the pandemic world, some of the little pieces we didn't get to do more, but to the importance and the value of broadening their perspective, letting them see difficult things and talking them through it. Heather likes to read a lot. She's fostered that well in our kids. I love the fact that books offer that opportunity to talk about a whole lot of different not so good scenarios in a very, very safe way, right? And I think that's awesome. And then the other side of it is, you think about like, well, what are they reading at school? Like, are you understanding the books they're getting if they're in school? But it offers a great place to talk through different things and explain the why, and in fostering and driving towards the character things that we want to see in their life over the long term. Um, uh, this one's one I've thought about a lot is the creativity piece, the creativity and peacefulness in their lives and in their heart. And we live kind of in a world where like boredom has been extinguished, right? Like we have phones, we have TV, we have constant entertainment, and we can set our kids up to expect us to constantly entertain them, right? Like we can set that up like, hey, we're going to do this fun thing this morning, and then when you get home this afternoon, then you can play your video games, and then we can do this, and we can set up an expectation in their lives and in their hearts that they must always be entertained and that it will always be provided by parents. And we've had to go back and forth with that discussion in our house because it's our desire, right? Like we want the best for them. We want to do great things for them, but also instilling and allowing them opportunities to have some independence and to be by themselves. And we talked week one about this, but some of the crazy studies that are coming out on screen time for kids, like developmental delays in young children whose parents are on the phone a lot, but then also decreased creativity and thoughtfulness in kids who are on screens an enormous amount of time, that they just don't get the same interaction, language development, and creativity time if they're watching somebody else have it on a screen versus doing it themselves. So I'm curious. I'll ask this one too. Like, well, what are ways in your household that you've tried to do either, you can bring up the no screen time thing in specific, or times that you try to, ways that you try to develop in them creativity and some independence. While you're thinking about that, I'll share one other wild story. I read across this earlier this winter. There's a child psychologist in the 1980s, and she wrote a book about what your 5-year-old should be able to do in 1980. And your 5-year-old by then should be able to go into the store by themselves. Well, not go to the store, go into the store, get what they need, pay for it, and double count correct change when they're done and come home. Like a little different standard of independence, little different standard of alone time and expectation. What do you do in your home for this? Well, and I mean, yeah, you're right. Like, and I've had the same struggle in different ways, but yeah, like some of it is for us as parents, like being okay of it not being all structured. We've talked a lot about structure and authority in the home, but also like allowing specific times, places, and guidelines for it to go off the rails. Like if you came over to C Group to our house a week ago, um, there was a giant wheelbarrow full of bricks and a hoe where Parker was building like a turtle playland in the yard. Like he had trenched out an area, was bricking it up so that the turtles couldn't escape, and going to dig a pond. So like little things, like you decide like where are your bounds that you're going to be okay with. You're right, and like let this go. We even when our kids were really really young, we started setting aside some specific times that the expectation for them was this is your time. You're going to be in this area of the house or in your room or wherever the parameters are, and you're going to just chill by yourself. Like, yeah, that was like one 1 year old. Like we were younger, we started that with our kids, trying to establish for them specific times. Like you're just going to be independent. And I can't help as we have this discussion think to like what's it, the Gladiator movie? Like, are you not entertained? Like, it's how sometimes it feels like with the kids. But yeah, the reality that, and the big piece of it, we've said it a million times as class, is the modeling of it. Like, do we expect to be constantly entertained? Then our kids have that expectation. The phone is the big temptation, right? Like if the moment you plop down on the couch, we do sometimes you instinctively look at your phone and you don't even know why you picked it up or what you're looking at it for. But like if you're doing those things, yeah, that's going to foster that desire in your kids. And I'll say, like, we're not anti-TV or video games or anything by any stretch of the imagination. For us, a lot of it looks like it's family stuff. Like if we watch TV, we're going to watch a movie together. I play video games with Parker. Like if we go play, like I always play with them. Unless they're like in the car, if they play, it's something that more of us are doing as a hangout time. But looking for those ways to foster creativity, allow them to go, but also set the expectation that you aren't going to be their entertainer, that they can foster that on their own. Well, I like going to stores with one entrance. Like I'll go to one entrance store and I'll drop Parker off and give him a task. We started this when he was maybe 8. Like drop him off, give him a task, go in and get this and come out. The only trouble he had was that adults freaked out. That's like adults freaked out. He was like, "Well, I asked and I tried to pay," and they're like, "What? What do you?" Well, I'll share one more story as we wrap up, and then we'll. When we were at Tierra Linda, the kids were like, Riley was an infant, and yeah, the boys were obviously like, I don't know, like 3 and 6, and they were all asleep. And I was going to a UK game with a friend, and Heather was on her way back from something else, and I was like, I'm just leaving. They're gonna be fine. They're all asleep. They're like good. And so I went and parked my truck behind the apartment complex. And she was like 20 minutes from home. And I was like, I am leaving. I'm going to the game. You'll be home in 20 minutes. They're in bed. They'll never know the difference. So I just went and parked my truck behind the apartments and came back to the house. And I saw her pull in the driveway, and I could just see it on her face. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm dead. It doesn't matter that it's a joke now. Like, I am dead. But I say it in joke. I say all that to say it's never too crazy on occasion. But Heather's call for me when I take the kids out and go outside is always, whatever you're planning, take it one notch down. Like for me, just whatever you're gonna do, just one notch down and think of me. But anyway, I love it. I love the discussion about teaching our kids some independence, some creativity, fostering gratitude and contentment, thinking about the character in the long term, in the little things that we do, and being intentional. And a lot of times, like, it's hard work. It's hard work you're going to have to do anyway. But there's a lot of little spins you can give on the day-to-day to teach a lesson and to let them learn something new. Yeah, I mean that's awesome, and it's a perspective they don't get to see. I think a lot about my kids, seeing the way that we're fortunate to be able to live, where Heather's staying at home most of the time, and where I work from home 80% of the time. Like that's just an adult life that is not likely. They're going to see different things and see that hey, some people's job is a service to the community in a different way, and it involves being gone a lot. And different things. So anyway, the value of that broadened perspective. All right, so week 4, we're going to talk about specifically discipline, and I'll be vulnerable with you all and talk over like what a spanking looks like in our house, what correction looks like. And then week 5, we're going to just kind of be a catch-all, a lot of discussion like this, like a little bit of idea sharing, what have you tried in your home, and then week 6, I think we're going to pull in hopefully Mel and Chris Brewer, do a little Q&A. So if you have any things you in particular like want to talk about with the whole group, shoot Heather or I a message. You're probably more likely to get a detailed response that I won't miss if you send it to Heather. But give one of us a shout, and it'll be something that we can chat on as a group. With that, let me close this in prayer. Pray, Father, just thank you for this day that you've given us today. Thank you for our time together to spend in your word and talking about and strategizing how we can be the parents that you've called us to be. I thank you for all that you do. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.